You're having a fantastic Wednesday. Facebook, thank you so much for kindly joining us this evening. Now, tonight's discussion may have been a little misleading with the headline because what I want to talk about is how to maximize nutrient timing to ultimately maximize your fat loss. And when people hear the words nutrient timing, they often think about the post-workout window, or maybe some people think about pre-workout, intra-workout, and post-workout. But what I want to discuss tonight are strategies that are involved throughout an entire 24-hour period that, when put together, collectively may help give you that extra edge to lose a few more pounds or to shed a few more percents of body fat to give you that dream physique you desire. Now, first things first, it would be prudent of me not to discuss the intra and post-workout period. But I'm going to keep this very simple and very light because we've talked about this at great length before and you're probably already familiar. And let's just be very candid here and we'll talk carbohydrates. The bulk of your carbohydrates should come at the intra, and post-workout period because carbohydrates are your muscle's primary energy source. You want to make sure you have ample fuel, so to speak, before your workout and during your workout so that you can push yourself appropriately and achieve the desired stimulus that you're going after. But then subsequently, you want to make sure you have plenty of carbohydrates after your workout to make sure you replenish those you use during your workout and again, to enhance your recovery. So with that said, we're going to just spend our time wisely and focus on the remainder of the day, the other 22 or 21 hours, if you will. And the first thing I want to talk about is your eating frequency. And I highly recommend that you are eating somewhere between every 3 to 5 hours. Now, I will be the first to say that you can lose weight eating every 8 hours or eating every 12 hours if you're someone who loves the intermittent fasting approach. But when you take one of these approaches that sets you up to have a longer duration in between meals, you do put yourself at greater risk for muscle loss. The reason being, when you eat a protein-rich meal, a protein does its thing and has all those wonderful benefits we've discussed before and will certainly come across again. Ultimately, these benefits, when it comes to muscle mass and stimulating muscle growth and muscle maintenance down at the cellular level, well, they peak at about an hour and a half and come back down to baseline in about 3 hours. So roughly 3, maybe 4 hours after a meal, you're ready for another protein-rich meal to jumpstart those benefits again and to make sure you're not in a net negative or catabolic state where your body is beginning to break down more new muscle mass than it is building new muscle mass. Well, when you go a long period without food, you start to prolong the time you're in this catabolic nature where your body is indeed breaking down more muscle than it is building. And sure, this might seem like, no big deal in the short term, especially if it's an extra hour or two, but that adds up. If day after day, you're not only in a catabolic state because you're going so far or so long in between meals, but you're also in a calorie deficit, well, these two variables now work together to expedite the amount of muscle mass you are losing because your body is no longer prioritizing muscle maintenance. So again, something to keep in mind. Now, further building off of the eating every few hours, we have to then look at your energy levels, your blood glucose levels, and your appetite. All three are intertwined and affect one another. And the reason being, again, if you go a long period of time without food, your blood glucose slowly begins to dip, which means your energy begins to dip. Your ability to focus begins to dip. You kind of have a foggy brain. It's hard to concentrate. And oh, by the way, the only thing that's not going down is your appetite, which is skyrocketing the longer you go without food, especially when you're already in a calorie deficit. So again, more reason to eat every 3 to 5 hours. But now, one of the coolest things I'm finally going to get to this evening is how you distribute your carbohydrates the remainder of the day, outside of that period before, during, and after your workout. And there's a lot of cool research, though there's still more needed, I'll be the first to admit, that is examining what the impact is on body fat storage and body fat burning when you pair a high carbohydrate food or high carbohydrate meal with a high fat meal. So what I'm talking about, let's say for instance, you have, a cup of brown rice and then you have 3 or 4 tablespoons of peanut butter. This ultimately, which is very relative, has become a high carbohydrate and a high fat meal simultaneously in one. What research has shown is that together, when you have a lot of carbohydrates and a lot of fat, fat storage is increased and fat breakdown or fat oxidation is actually blunted. And that's because the rise in insulin, which is released in order to manage the overwhelming amount of glucose or carbohydrates you've just consumed. When insulin skyrockets, they bring carbohydrates back down to normal levels. Insulin, triggers a few other things down the cellular pathways that essentially blunt fat breakdown. They say, hey, let's put a pause on this. Let's deal with carbohydrates and enter a sort of storage mindset. So we're storing carbohydrates and we're storing fat for the next few hours. So what I'm getting at is if you continue to have high carb, high fat meals, you might be slowly but gradually exposing yourself to this little bit of a difference that accumulates very significantly over time that is slowly working against your physique. Now, when I talk about a high carb or high fat meal, it's very relative. But to give you kind of a framework or an idea, this might entail having 30 to 40 grams of carbohydrates and over 20 grams of fat at the same meal. When I talk about grams of carbs and grams of fat, I'm referring from direct sources, all the carbs from oatmeal, all the carbs from peanut butter, not the little trace amounts that are adding up from various components of your meal. I'll also be the first to say having a high carb, high fat meal while still eating in a calorie deficit and hitting your macronutrient needs for the day is not going to all of a sudden, oh my gosh, ruin your physique, ruin your diet by any means. But the point of this discussion is just to give you those little tidbits that just may be able to provide that extra 1 or 2% you need to take your physique to the next level. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is now transitioning to the last meal of the day. And that is a meal that needs to happen because if we skip that bedtime meal, we only further prolong the amount of time that we are spending in a catabolic or net negative balance, and then it's not good for muscle maintenance, especially during a diet, but also what to have at that meal. Protein needs to be there. I think we can all agree now based on the last 6 or 7 minutes we've been discussing this, but now there are a couple options to consider on what's going to go with your protein-rich bedtime meal. And if you have macros available, should it be fat? Should it be carbohydrate? Should it be both? Well, a couple of things just to keep in mind. If you have a protein and fat combination, the fat is going to slow down digestion, which may have a positive impact on creating a steady drip-like effect of amino acids to your muscles throughout the hours you're sleeping. Conversely, if you go the carbohydrate route, which, very important to note, carbohydrates at bedtime are not going to make you fat whatsoever, but it's very important to note a carbohydrate-rich meal before bed may enhance your sleep quality and shorten the time it takes to fall asleep. Now, it's up to you to decide how you want to distribute your carbohydrates and fats during the day, keeping in mind we want to prioritize the carbohydrates around the workout. Carbs might be beneficial before bed, fat might be beneficial before bed. So putting this all together now and wrapping it up, here's what I recommend. Pre-workout, intra-workout, post-workout should contain anywhere from 60 to maybe even 80% of your daily carbohydrate intake. The remainder of your meals, you should always have your protein and veggies, maybe excluding the nighttime meal, because sometimes eating broccoli is hard, but especially after 9 p.m. when those cravings are kick in. But the rest of your meals should have a protein component and then an or carbohydrate or fat component. So for instance, maybe you work out at 5 o'clock, or let's say you work out at noon. You have your post-workout meal at 2. You have a dinner meal at 5, which again might have protein, veggies, and only carbohydrates. And then your bedtime meal is only protein and fat. No other meal during the day has a significant amount of carbohydrates and fat at the same meal. Again, this tiny difference may not be a difference, but there is some research to show it might have a little bit, of an impact on optimizing your physique. Questions, comments, concerns, comment, direct message me. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you're thinking, pondering. I'll answer it in a future video. Next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be back to chat more nutrition information. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'll see you then.